Territorial Army, of course, is a volunteering spirit. And Sachin, you notice the irony. Some may say that the very fact that somebody like yourself chose to be in the TA, in the Territorial Army, goes to show that people's josh, people's attachment to the uniform is not lessened by the duration, as it were, of the tenure. First, talk a little bit about why you decided to do this. What was that tipping point that you joined the Territorial Army?
You see, as I said, Bakha, my grandfather died quite young, but he was a Havaldar in the army. He was not very educated, so he was a non-commissioned person in the army. He retired at 42 or 43. My father was a fighter pilot in the Airforce, and while I'm still in active politics. I was a member of parliament. In fact, I was a minister when I decided that I must, in some way, continue the legacy and involvement of my family in the armed forces. And you have to be below 40 to be able to join the TA. So I did the SSB, I did the medical, the physical, the written examination, the discussion. So it took me 7, 8, 9 months to qualify for a full commission in the TA. I don't draw any salary from the TA. I do what is required of me in terms of my unit, my attendance, my examinations, my participation in the unit. But this is a reserved army. Territorial Army is not on the active duty in the front lines. The army is something that has a different flavor to it. We're all part of the same larger family, so larger unit. But my own personal idea was to be involved in some way. Even though I have a day job, I do something else, for a living. But my involvement in the army was my passion. It was something that I wanted to do personally, and I didn't choose the easy way out by getting a honorary commission or just to wear the uniform once a year. I wanted to be a regularly part of this of the army. So it's been out 11 years since I got commissioned. So mine is a personal story.
So you actually sat for the SSB, which is what these young men who are out of the streets would have also sat for to, in fact, join, they thought, the military for a full term.
So to become a commissioned officer, you have to go through a written exam, then a medical exam.
Yes.
And then you join, then you pass the SSB examination, which is a much tougher thing to do. So I was in SSB Bangalore and I passed that course, and then I got selected, and then I got commissioned, and I just recently got promoted. But the TA and my journey is different to what we're seeing on the ground today.
Of course.
So what happens, Leslie, Rajasthan, where I come from, if you get into the army, it's not about just having a permanent regular job. It's the fact that the young Jawan knows that when I go and face the bullets on the borderline of India and Pakistan or China, my family, my relatives, my children are taken care of, their medical, my pension, the canteen facilities, there's a long-term safety and security. And unless the Jawan is motivated, satisfied and happy, he or she can't deliver what we expect him to deliver, right? So what's happening now is that you're having this curtailed timeline of 3.5, 4 years. So if I'm in the front lines and I'm thinking, well, I have to get out of here in 3 or 4 years, will I take a bullet for my comrade, for my peer? So it's a social impact situation which the government, I think, has not put enough thought to. My worry is manifold, but right now I'm seeing unemployment is like at its highest in India, and the army is not really a large-scale employment giver, but it's the pride of our country. And to be tinkering with it, to have young people's aspirations, thrashed on the ground for 2.5, 3 years, they prepared for it. 3 saal ka backlog ho gaya. So multiple reasons have added to the anguish and the protest that we're witnessing.
I'm going to come to Agnipath in just a moment, but I want to also bring up pictures of your father, whom I am old enough to remember very well before he tragically died in an accident, an Air Force officer before he was a politician, Sachin Pilot. And you've also spoken about your grandfather. So really 2 generations there of the military. How did that shape you? Did you ever consider being a soldier instead of a politician? You were in corporate life before. Did you ever desire to join the military?
I don't know about many, but most in India, if you're a young boy or a girl, in a family where you grow up amongst families and friends which are armed forces background, there's a tendency to want to join. But at a very young age, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. But I got glasses when I was in school, so I couldn't go in for that. But I still managed to get a private flying license, which I'm happy because, my name is Pilot. So I thought the least I could do is be licensed to fly. But then as I grew older, I did college and my further studies. I always wanted to be a part of it. I went to an Air Force school. So my friends and my family friends were all Army, Navy, Air Force kids. And so we grew up in that atmosphere. It's a different feeling to grow up in an environment that is mostly made up of armed forces backgrounds, children and relatives. It's a different feeling. I think many across the country will share that sentiment. So you have to really be a part of it to sense it. So my inclination towards the armed forces since I was very young has been strong, and that's what culminated in me deciding while I was a minister in the government of India to go in for a few weeks training to pass the exam. It took 9 months for me to get my commission, so I really quite worked hard for it, to finally have the olive green that I could wear.
Okay, so let's now come from that perspective to Agnipath and the criticisms that you've raised. And let's bring up some of the government's counters. And not just the governments, these are the three chiefs who have, in the presence of the defense minister, presented this policy. One is the argument that the military is not an employment exchange. It is not incumbent upon the military to provide jobs. So while the rage on the streets is an expression of that kind of despair, that cannot be the military's cross to carry. That's the first point. The second point is that, in fact, now, today itself, 10% quotas have been announced in the CAPF, the Central Armed Police Force, and the Assam Rifles towards this criticism ki 4 saal baad kya hoga. Respond to both of these points.
First, you see this knee-jerk reaction of enhancing the age limits, which happened last night, and then this afternoon about 10% reservations in the paramilitary forces. I mean, these are all knee-jerk reactions to the protests that are happening across the country. Should not that the government have done all this thinking before announcing the policy and making millions of young people insecure in their minds? One. Second, your earlier question was employment. Employment is today by far the biggest single issue this country faces. While it's true that the armed forces are not responsible for giving jobs to everybody, but having that aspiration of becoming a part of the army is something that the armed forces themselves can't deny. It's cultural for us. It's our socioeconomic setting that makes us want to aspire to become an officer or be a part of the armed forces. So they're not responsible for giving jobs to everybody in this country, but it is at least where I come from, Rajasthan, Haryana, Punjab, Northern Belt, parts of South India also. A lot of people aspire to be. They train for this. So you can't really deny them this opportunity just because you want to curtail some pension bills. And again, to my mind, the pension bill in India is about 20% of the entire defense budget. So there are other ways and means of curtailing that. We could have thought this through and talked about it with many stakeholders. But my simple point is that you're playing with far too much. Not only are you making young people, cut off one large portion of what they think could be their future employment, you're also now, kind of tinkering with the hierarchy, the structures, the makeup of each battalion, each platoon, each platoon, and each unit. So all of this has very long-term impacts. And I don't think we today are in a strategic position to be so complacent about our security structures. We have, like I said, 2 active borders. We have all these challenges in the northeast, on the Kashmir border, LOC. So this is not the right time to have done all of this. And even if they were to do it, it would have been better to have discussed, debated, deliberated, and stage-wise implemented. Because today it's having a lot of pushback. Because like always, the government of India said, you want to do something for the farmers, they make 3 farm laws. Nobody asked for the farm laws. And sadly, 2 years later, they had to withdraw those 3 farm laws. So you're making policy for a section of our society. They should be thanking the government for the policy making, as opposed to they're on the streets protesting. So really, there's very little communication and debate, between the government and stakeholders, and that's what's causing all this problem.
Do you believe that, like the farm laws were withdrawn eventually or put on hold, certainly after a year-long protest? Do you see this going that way? You have drawn an analogy with demonetization. The opposition has been accused by the government of stoking the fire on the streets. How do you respond to that?
I don't understand why anything that goes wrong is always blamed on the opposition. Was it the opposition that was sitting on the streets for a year and a half? Farmers from across the country were agitating. Today, when you see young people, sadly taking up violent means to register their protest, how is the opposition involved in all of this? All we're saying is have a rethink. We are a dynamic country. We should be flexible in our approach. Why be so rigid and so determined to push through and to shove down the throat of the people the policy that you think is the best? There could be other options. So I think the state of mind and the sense of arrogance that has creeped into the government is having its costs. I'm one of those people who believes that this is far too sensitive. It's beyond BJP, Congress, opposition, government, Indian Army, our armed forces, 7 decades of hard work to really make this institution something that we're all proud of. It deserves much more than just tutu meme about one particular policy. This is far more important. Our integrity, our strength, our valor of the armed forces. You really can't play around with that just because you're in government and I'm in opposition. It may change sometime later. But today what we need to do is assuage the feeling of the young people who are obviously disheartened and feel shortchanged because they feel that they're limiting the options of employment in the coveted armed forces. and the government sadly is just doing one knee-jerk reaction after the other. But is it enough to calm tempers? I'm not too sure.